Imagine standing at the peak of your success. Everything you worked for is finally yours. The accolades, the recognition, the power. And then, in one moment of blind arrogance, you lose it all. Not because you weren't talented, not because you didn't work hard, but because you believed your own story a little too much. You became convinced that the rules didn't apply to you, that you were special, that you had arrived, and that belief, that invisible force whispering sweet lies in your ear, destroyed everything you built. This isn't a story about failure. It's a story about the enemy that lives inside all of us. The one we feed every time we crave validation, chase status, or refuse to admit we were wrong. The enemy that turns ambition into arrogance, confidence into delusion, and success into a prison. You're watching the book Sanctuary. Ryan Holiday didn't write this book from a place of judgment. He wrote it from a place of pain. A young marketing prodigy who worked with billion-dollar brands, advised powerful people, and tasted success before most people graduate college, Holiday found himself standing in the rubble of his own making. Not because he failed at his work, but because he succeeded too quickly. And in that success, he lost himself. He became the very thing he despised. Obsessed with being right, addicted to recognition, incapable of hearing criticism, and it cost him everything that mattered. This book is his reckoning. It's a battle cry against the voice that tells you you're better than everyone else, against the instinct to protect your image instead of pursuing the truth, against the addiction to being the center of attention. Through the lives of warriors, artists, leaders, and legends, Holiday shows us what happens when ego takes the wheel. And more importantly, he shows us how to fight back. Because the enemy isn't out there. It's in here. And until we face it, we'll never be free. In the next hour, you're going to hear stories that will shake you, lessons that will challenge you, and truths that will set you free. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Voice That Lies. There's a voice inside your head. It's been there your whole life. It tells you stories. Stories about who you are, what you deserve, and why you're better than the person next to you. It whispers when someone criticizes you. It roars when someone doubts you. It smiles when you win and sulks when you lose. This voice is ego, and it's the most convincing liar you'll ever meet. Ryan Holiday opens the book with a simple but brutal truth. Ego is not confidence. Confidence is earned. It's built on competence, humility, and self-awareness. Ego is borrowed. It's built on image, comparison, and insecurity. Confidence says, I can do this because I've prepared. Ego says, I can do this because I'm special. And that distinction changes everything. Think about the last time you felt truly confident. Maybe it was before a presentation you rehearsed 100 times. Maybe it was in a conversation where you actually knew what you were talking about. That feeling wasn't ego. It was competence meeting opportunity. Now think about the last time you felt defensive. When someone questioned your work and you immediately got angry. When someone succeeded where you failed and you found a way to diminish their achievement. When you couldn't admit you were wrong because it felt like losing. That was ego. And it wasn't protecting you. It was trapping you. Holiday introduces us to a young man named William Tecumseh Sherman. Before he became one of the greatest military minds in American history, Sherman was just a soldier. A good one, but not a celebrated one. And when the Civil War broke out and generals were being promoted left and right, Sherman did something almost unthinkable. He refused a promotion, not because he didn't want success, but because he knew he wasn't ready. He knew that taking command before he understood leadership would lead to disaster. So he chose to learn instead of lead. He chose humility over glory. And because of that choice, when his moment came, he was ready. He didn't just win battles. He changed the course of history. This is what ego steals from us. The patience to prepare. The humility to learn. The wisdom to know when we're not ready. It convinces us that wanting something is the same as deserving it. That confidence can be faked until it becomes real. That image is more important than substance. And we believe it until reality proves us wrong. Holliday's own story is painfully honest. By his early 20s, he was a marketing director at a billion-dollar company. He was advising authors and executives. He was being flown around the country to speak at conferences. And in his mind, he had arrived. He stopped listening. He stopped learning. He started believing that his early success meant he was untouchable. And when things started to fall apart, when his relationships fractured and his work suffered, he couldn't see it, because ego doesn't let you see. It only lets you justify. This is the first battle. Recognizing the voice, hearing the lies it tells, seeing the ways it distorts reality to protect your self-image. Because once you see it, you can fight it. And that fight begins with a simple question. Am I building real confidence, or am I feeding my ego? Chapter 2. Talk less, do more. In 1934, the writer Upton Sinclair ran for governor of California. He was a brilliant storyteller, a best-selling author, and a passionate activist. And before the election, he did something unusual. He wrote a book called I, Governor of California, and How I Ended Poverty. In it, he described, in the past tense, all the brilliant policies he would enact once he won. He painted a vivid picture of his success, and the book was a bestseller. But he lost the election, badly. And later, a friend of his observed something heartbreaking. After writing the book, Sinclair seemed to lose interest in the campaign. It was as if he had already experienced the victory in his imagination, as if the act of talking about it had satisfied the hunger to actually do it. This is one of ego's most seductive tricks. It makes us feel like talking about something is the same as doing it. Like announcing your plans is the same as executing them. Like describing your vision is the same as manifesting it. And the more we talk, the less we do. Because talking is easy, doing is hard. Ryan Holiday brings us into the modern age with this truth. We live in a world that celebrates noise. Social media rewards the announcement, not the accomplishment. We post about the gym before we go. We share our goals before we achieve them. We tell everyone about the book we're going to write, the business we're going to start, the life we're going to change. And then something strange happens. The validation we get from sharing the idea drains the motivation to execute it. The applause we receive for the intention replaces the satisfaction of the result. We become performers instead of practitioners. There's a reason the greatest creators work in silence. Why the most successful people don't broadcast their every move. It's not because they lack confidence. It's because they understand that the work is sacred, that it deserves protection, that the energy spent talking is energy stolen from doing, and they refuse to let ego turn their craft into a performance. Holiday tells the story of Emily Gould, a writer who had a lucrative book deal and 2 years to write a novel. But she never wrote it. Instead, she spent those 2 years on the internet, scrolling, posting, curating, tweeting. She convinced herself that building her brand was part of the work, that engaging with her audience was a form of creativity. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was avoiding the hard part, the blank page, the vulnerability of creation, the risk of failure. And when the deadline came, she had nothing to show for it. This is what happens when ego hijacks the process. It redirects our energy toward validation instead of value, toward appearance instead of substance, toward the story we tell about our work instead of the work itself. And the world enables this, because the world rewards the talker, the self-promoter, the loud, at least in the short term. But in the long term, the truth reveals itself. The person who talked about writing never finished the book. The person who posted about the gym never got in shape. The person who announced their big plans never built anything that lasted. Silence is not weakness. It's strength. It's the refusal to let ego steal your energy. It's the discipline to keep your head down and your hands busy. It's the wisdom to know that the work will speak for itself if you let it. So the question becomes, are you working or are you performing? Are you building or are you broadcasting? Are you letting the world applaud your potential or are you earning the right to your success? The greatest victories happen in the dark, in the early mornings when no one's watching, In the late nights when no one cares. In the moments when you choose the work over the applause. That's where real confidence is built. Not in the announcement, in the execution. Chapter 3. The student who never stops learning. Imagine you're at the top of your field. You've proven yourself. You've won championships, earned respect, built a reputation that precedes you. And then someone tells you that you need a teacher, that you still have things to learn, that despite everything you've accomplished, you're not done growing. How would you react? Would you dismiss it, defend your expertise, or would you have the humility to say yes? Ryan Holiday introduces us to Kirk Hammett. In 1983, Hammett was invited to join Metallica, one of the most promising metal bands in the world. He was a talented guitarist. He'd been playing for years. He was ready for the big stage, or so he thought, because shortly after joining the band, Hammett did something almost no one does after they've made it. He sought out a teacher. Not just any teacher. Joe Satriani, one of the greatest guitarists alive. And for 2 years, while touring the world and playing to thousands of fans, Hammett showed up every week for lessons. He sat in a small music shop in Berkeley and let a master tear apart his technique, rebuild his fundamentals, and push him beyond what he thought he was capable of. This is the mark of greatness. Not that you're talented, not that you're successful, but that you never stop being a student, that you're willing to admit what you don't know, that you're humble enough to seek out people who are better than you and learn from them. Ego hates this, because ego needs to believe that you've arrived, that you're done, that you don't need anyone else, and that belief is a death sentence. Holiday brings us to the ancient world, to the philosophy of Socrates. The wisest man in Athens, according to the Oracle of Delphi, was Socrates. And what made him wise? Not his knowledge, his awareness of his ignorance. He knew how much he didn't know. And that awareness kept him curious, kept him questioning, kept him learning until the day he died. He said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." And in a world obsessed with appearing smart, that's a revolutionary idea. But ego doesn't want you to admit ignorance. It wants you to defend your position, protect your image, and never let anyone see you struggle. It convinces you that asking for help is weakness, that admitting you were wrong is failure, that changing your mind is inconsistency. And so you stop growing. You stop listening. You stop learning. And you become a prisoner of your own expertise. Frank Shamrock, the legendary mixed martial artist, developed a system he called plus, minus, and equal. To become great, he said, you need 3 types of people in your life. Someone better than you, who can teach you. Someone worse than you, who you can teach. And someone equal to you, who can challenge you. This system keeps ego in check, because it forces you to admit that you're not the best, that you have blind spots, that you need feedback, correction, and perspective. And that's exactly what ego doesn't want you to believe. Holiday reflects on his own journey. He talks about the mentors who shaped him, the people who saw potential in him and invested their time, energy, and wisdom. And he admits that the moments he grew the most were the moments he was willing to be wrong, to hear criticism, to let someone show him a better way. The moments he stopped performing and started learning. And those moments didn't come naturally. They came through discipline, through the conscious decision to silence ego and open his mind. This is the paradox. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. The more you achieve, the more you see how much further you have to go. And only the people who embrace that paradox continue to grow. The rest plateau. They stop seeking feedback. They surround themselves with people who agree with them. They build walls around their expertise and defend it against any challenge. And slowly, without realizing it, they become irrelevant. So ask yourself, when was the last time you admitted you were wrong? When was the last time you asked for help? When was the last time you put yourself in a room where you were the least knowledgeable person and listened more than you spoke? Because if you can't remember, ego has already won. Chapter 4. The Trap of Passion. We're told from childhood to follow our passion, to find what we love, and chase it with everything we have. To let our emotions guide us, to trust our instincts, to burn with desire. And we believe it because passion feels good. It feels alive. It feels like purpose. But Ryan Holiday has a warning. Passion without discipline is a lie. Passion without strategy is self-destruction. Passion without humility is ego in disguise. He tells the story of Robert Falcon Scott, the British explorer who set out to be the first man to reach the South Pole. Scott was passionate, obsessed even. He believed in his mission with every fiber of his being. He assembled a team, secured funding, and set out into the most hostile environment on Earth. But he didn't prepare properly. He didn't listen to experts. He made decisions based on emotion, not evidence. He refused to use sled dogs because he believed it was more noble to pull the sleds themselves. And that decision, born of pride and passion, cost him his life and the lives of his entire team. Meanwhile, a Norwegian explorer named Roald Amundsen reached the pole first. Not because he was more passionate, because he was more disciplined. He studied, he planned, he adapted, and he survived. This is the dark side of passion. It blinds you. It makes you think that wanting something badly enough is the same as being ready for it. That intensity is the same as competence. That emotion is the same as wisdom. And when reality doesn't match your expectations, passion turns into bitterness, resentment, and rage. Holiday brings us to the story of Eleanor Roosevelt, one of the most powerful and influential women in American history. And when people described her, they didn't use the word passionate. They used the word purposeful. She had direction. She had clarity. She had a mission. But she didn't let her emotions dictate her actions. She didn't chase the spotlight or demand validation. She worked quietly, steadily, and relentlessly. And she changed the world, not through passion, through discipline. Passion says, I want this now. Purpose says, I will do what it takes. Passion says, this should be easy because I care so much. Purpose says, this will be hard, and I'll do it anyway. Passion burns hot and fast. Purpose burns slow and steady, and only one of them lasts. Holiday reflects on his own mistakes, the times he was driven by passion and convinced himself that his enthusiasm was enough. The projects he started with fire and abandoned when the excitement faded. The relationships he entered because they felt right in the moment, without asking if they were right for the long term. And he admits that every time passion led the way, ego was driving. Because passion feeds ego. It tells you that your feelings matter more than reality, that your desire justifies your actions, that the world should bend to accommodate your dreams. But the world doesn't care about your passion. It cares about your results. It cares about your consistency. It cares about whether you can show up day after day when the excitement is gone and the work is hard. And that requires something deeper than passion. It requires purpose, a reason that transcends how you feel in any given moment, a commitment that survives the inevitable disappointments, setbacks, and failures. So ask yourself, what drives you? Is it passion, or is it purpose? Are you chasing a feeling, or are you building a foundation? Because if it's just passion, ego is already in control. And when the fire dies, you'll have nothing left. Chapter 5, The Canvas Strategy. There's a moment early in most careers where you face a choice. You can demand recognition, insist on being seen, and fight for your place at the table. Or you can do something radical. You can serve. You can support. You can make other people look good. And that choice, more than almost anything else, determines whether you'll build something that lasts. Ryan Holiday calls this the canvas strategy. It's the willingness to be the one who clears the path for others, to be the assistant, the supporter, the behind-the-scenes force that makes success possible. And ego hates it, because ego demands credit. It needs validation. It can't stand the idea of doing great work that no one sees. But the people who master this strategy, who embrace this humility, are the ones who build empires. Holiday tells the story of Benjamin Franklin, Before he was a founding father, before he was a diplomat, before he was one of the most respected men in America, Franklin was a young printer working for his older brother, and he wanted to be a writer. So he wrote essays. Brilliant, insightful, sharp essays. But he didn't put his name on them. He slid them under the door of his brother's print shop in the middle of the night, and his brother published them on the front page. They became wildly popular, and Franklin got no credit. For years, no one knew they were his, and he was fine with that, because he wasn't writing for applause. He was writing to learn, to experiment, to refine his craft, and by the time the world knew his name, he was a master. This is the canvas strategy. It's the long game. It's the understanding that if you focus on doing great work, the recognition will come. But if you focus on recognition, the work will suffer. It's the willingness to sacrifice short-term validation for long-term growth. And it requires a level of humility that most people simply don't have. Holiday brings us to Bill Belichick, one of the greatest football coaches in history. Early in his career, Belichick was obsessed with one thing: film study. While other coaches hated the tedious work of breaking down game footage, Belichick loved it. He volunteered to do it for free. He spent countless hours analyzing plays, finding patterns, identifying weaknesses, and he never asked for credit. He just handed his insights to the head coach and let him take the glory. And because of that, Belichick became indispensable. Coaches fought to have him on their staff. And when his time came, he was ready. Not because he demanded opportunities, because he earned them. This is what ego can't understand. That the fastest way to the top is often to start at the bottom. That the best way to lead is to first learn to serve. That the people who change the world are usually the ones who spent years making other people successful. Because in that process, they learned what actually works. They built relationships. They developed skills. And when their moment came, they didn't have to fake it. But most people won't do this. They see service as beneath them. They see support as weakness. They want the title, the recognition, the credit before they've done the work. And so they fight for positions they're not ready for. They take credit for work they didn't do. They alienate the people who could help them. And they wonder why success feels so empty when they finally get it. Holiday asks a simple question. What if you stopped trying to be recognized and started trying to be useful? What if you stopped demanding credit and started delivering value? What if you made it your mission to make the people around you more successful? What would happen? The answer is simple. You'd learn faster. You'd build stronger relationships. You'd create opportunities that didn't exist before. And eventually, you'd build something that no one could take away. The canvas strategy isn't about being a doormat. It's about being strategic. It's about understanding that power isn't given. It's earned. And the way you earn it is by proving, over and over again, that you're indispensable. Not because you demand to be seen, because you make it impossible to ignore the results. Chapter 6. The Cost of Entitlement. There's a moment in history that perfectly captures the insanity of ego. The year is 480 BC. The Persian Emperor Xerxes is leading the largest army the world has ever seen across a narrow strait called the Hellespont. He's built a bridge of boats to cross the water, and then a storm comes. The waves surge. The bridge is destroyed, and Xerxes is furious. So furious that he orders his soldiers to whip the water. 300 lashes. He has the ocean branded with hot irons. He screams at the sea, calling it a bitter and rebellious servant. And then, just for good measure, he beheads the engineers who built the bridge. This is what entitlement looks like in its purest form. The belief that the world owes you obedience. That nature itself should bend to your will. That when things don't go your way, it's not your fault. It's the fault of forces beyond your control. And those forces must be punished. Ryan Holiday uses this story to show us how ego warps reality. When we feel entitled, we lose touch with what's actually possible. We start to believe that our desires are the same as facts, that our vision is the same as reality. And when the two don't match, we rage, we blame, we destroy. And in the process, we destroy ourselves. Holiday brings us to the modern world, to the boardrooms of failing companies, to the offices of politicians who can't admit they were wrong, to the lives of people who spent years climbing the ladder only to realize they hate the view from the top. And in all these stories, there's a common thread: entitlement, the belief that success should be easier, that people should be more loyal, that circumstances should be more favorable. And when reality doesn't cooperate, ego convinces us that we're the victim. But the truth is simpler and harder. Life doesn't owe you anything. The world doesn't care about your plans. Success doesn't care about your feelings. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can stop wasting energy on resentment and start spending it on results. Holiday reflects on his own entitlement, the times he felt insulted by criticism, the moments he believed his talent was being wasted, the periods where he convinced himself that if people just understood him, everything would be different. And he admits that every one of those moments was ego talking, because the world wasn't the problem. He was. His expectations were unrealistic, his sense of importance was inflated, and his refusal to accept reality was costing him everything. This is the trap. Entitlement doesn't just make you miserable, it makes you ineffective, because when you're busy blaming circumstances, you're not busy changing them. When you're focused on what you deserve, you're not focused on what you need to do. And when you're waiting for the world to recognize your greatness, you're not building anything worth recognizing. The antidote to entitlement is simple: gratitude. Not the shallow kind, the deep kind, the kind that looks at every opportunity, every relationship, every moment of success and says, I didn't earn this alone. I was lucky. I was helped. I was given chances I didn't deserve. And from that place of gratitude, you stop demanding and start delivering. You stop complaining and start contributing. You stop waiting for recognition and start earning it. Holiday tells the story of George Marshall, one of the greatest military leaders in American history. Marshall was offered opportunities most generals would kill for. But when he was asked if he wanted to lead the D-Day invasion, the most prestigious military operation of the war, he said no. Not because he didn't want it, but because he believed someone else could do it better. He put the mission above his ego. And because of that, he became more respected, more influential, and more successful than he ever would have been if he demanded the spotlight. This is the paradox. The less you demand, the more you receive. The less you crave recognition, the more respect you earn. The less entitled you feel, the more entitled you become. Not because the world rewards humility out of kindness, but because humility is what allows you to see reality clearly. And only people who see reality clearly can navigate it successfully. So ask yourself, what do you feel entitled to? What do you believe you deserve that you haven't earned? What are you waiting for the world to give you instead of going out and taking it? Because as long as you're waiting, ego is in control, and ego will never let you be free. Chapter 7. Always stay a student. Genghis Khan is remembered as a conqueror, a warrior, a man who built the largest empire the world had ever seen through sheer force and ruthlessness. But that's not the full story, because what made Khan truly great wasn't his ability to destroy. It was his ability to learn. Every time he conquered a new territory, he didn't just take their land. He took their knowledge, their technology, their best ideas, and he integrated them into his own empire. He learned siege warfare from the Chinese. He adopted administrative systems from the Persians. He borrowed military tactics from the Turks. And because of that, his empire didn't just expand, it evolved. Ryan Holiday uses Khan to illustrate a truth that most successful people forget. The moment you stop learning is the moment you start dying. Not literally, but professionally, spiritually, intellectually, because the world doesn't stop changing just because you figured something out. And if you're not growing, you're falling behind. This is where ego becomes lethal, because ego tells you that once you've achieved something, you're done. That success is a destination, not a process. That once you've proven yourself, You don't need to keep proving yourself. And that belief is a trap, because the skills that got you here won't necessarily get you there. The knowledge that made you successful yesterday might be obsolete tomorrow. And if you're not willing to unlearn, relearn, and keep learning, you'll become irrelevant. Holiday tells the story of Kirk Hammett again, but this time from a different angle. Even after Metallica became one of the biggest bands in the world, even after they'd sold millions of albums and played to sold-out stadiums, Hammett kept taking lessons. Not because he thought he was bad, because he thought he could be better. And that mindset, that refusal to rest on his laurels, is what kept him at the top for decades. This is the mark of mastery. Not that you know everything, but that you're always trying to know more. Not that you've arrived, but that you're always moving. And the only way to maintain that mindset is to kill ego. Because ego wants you to protect your image. It wants you to avoid situations where you might look foolish. It wants you to surround yourself with people who agree with you and never challenge you. And if you do that, you'll stop growing. Holiday reflects on his own journey. The times he thought he'd figured it all out. The moments where he stopped reading, stopped seeking mentorship, stopped asking questions. And he admits that those were the times he stagnated. Not because he wasn't talented, but because he stopped being curious. He stopped being humble. He stopped being a student. And ego convinced him that he didn't need to be. The truth is brutal. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. The more you achieve, the more you see how far you have to go. And only the people who can live with that tension continue to grow. The rest plateau. They get comfortable. They start defending their expertise instead of expanding it. And slowly, without realizing it, they become fossils. So ask yourself, when was the last time you learned something new? When was the last time you put yourself in a position where you were the least knowledgeable person in the room? When was the last time you asked for feedback and actually listened? Because if you can't remember, ego has already taken over. Chapter 8, The Disease of Me. Pat Riley, the legendary basketball coach, noticed a pattern. Every time a team won a championship, something happened. The players started to change. They stopped playing for the team and started playing for themselves. They started caring more about their individual stats than the collective victory. They started believing their own hype. And the next season, they'd fall apart. Riley called it the disease of me. And it's one of the most dangerous forces in any organization, any relationship, any life. Ryan Holiday uses this concept to explore what happens when ego infects success. Because here's the thing, ego doesn't just show up when you're struggling. It shows up when you're winning. Maybe especially when you're winning. Because success feeds ego. It validates it. It makes you believe that you're special, that the rules don't apply to you, that you can relax, celebrate, and coast. And that belief is poison. Holiday tells the story of George Marshall, one of the greatest military leaders in American history. Marshall was offered opportunities that most generals would have killed for, but he turned them down, not because he didn't want them, but because he knew they weren't about the mission. They were about his ego. When he was offered the chance to lead the D-Day invasion, the most prestigious military operation of World War II, he declined. He believed Eisenhower was better suited for it, and instead of resenting that decision, he supported it. He put the mission above his pride, and because of that, the Allies won the war. This is what separates great leaders from good ones. Great leaders know that it's not about them, that their role is to serve the mission, not to be celebrated, that their job is to make everyone around them better, not to prove how smart they are. And ego hates that, because ego needs credit. It needs recognition. It needs to be the center of attention. And if it doesn't get that, it sabotages everything. Holiday reflects on his own experience. The times he felt underappreciated. The moments where he watched someone else get credit for work he contributed to. The periods where he was doing important work behind the scenes and no one seemed to notice. And he admits that in those moments, ego whispered. It told him he deserved more, that he was being taken advantage of, that he should fight for recognition. And when he listened to that voice, He made everything worse. Because here's the truth. The world doesn't owe you recognition. It doesn't owe you credit. It doesn't owe you anything. And the sooner you accept that, the freer you become. Because then you can focus on the work, on the mission, on making things better. Not for applause, not for validation, but because that's what matters. Holiday tells the story of Bill Belichick, the Patriots coach who keeps a photo on his desk. It's not a photo of a championship. It's a photo of a player they drafted who never made it. A reminder that they're not as good as they think they are, that they can always improve. That success is never permanent. And that mindset is what keeps the Patriots at the top year after year. This is the antidote to the disease of me. Humility. Not the fake kind. The real kind. The kind that says, I got here because I was lucky. Because I was helped. Because I was given opportunities one didn't earn. And from that place, you don't need recognition. Because you know the truth. You know how fragile success is. You know how much you owe to other people. And you know that the moment you start believing your own hype, you're done. So ask yourself, are you working for the mission, or are you working for the applause? Are you focused on the result, or are you focused on being seen? Because if it's the latter, ego is driving, and it's only a matter of time before you crash. Chapter 9, Draw the Line. John DeLorean had everything. He was a brilliant engineer, a charismatic leader, a visionary who could see the future of the car industry before anyone else. And he threw it all away. Not because he failed, but because when he started to fail, he couldn't stop. He couldn't accept reality. He couldn't admit that maybe, just maybe, he'd made mistakes. So instead of pausing, reflecting, and changing course, he doubled down. He made bigger bets. He took more risks. And eventually, he ended up arrested in a drug deal, trying to save a company that was already dead. Ryan Holiday uses DeLorean's story to illustrate one of ego's most destructive patterns. When we're losing, when things are falling apart, ego convinces us that the solution is more effort, more risk, more aggression. It tells us that stopping is weakness, that admitting defeat is failure, that we just need to push harder and everything will turn around. And sometimes that's true, but more often it's a lie, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop. Holiday contrasts this with Steve Jobs. When Jobs was fired from Apple, he didn't spiral. He didn't sabotage the company. He didn't spend years fighting a losing battle. He accepted reality. He admitted that he'd made mistakes, that he'd let his ego run wild, that he'd been a nightmare to work with. And then he moved on. He started new companies. He learned. He grew. And when he eventually returned to Apple, he was a different person. Wiser, humbler, more effective. And he saved the company. This is the line between persistence and delusion, between resilience and self-destruction. And ego doesn't want you to see it, because seeing it means admitting that you might be wrong, that your strategy might be flawed, that your dream might need to change. And ego can't handle that, so it convinces you to keep fighting, even when the battle is already lost. Holiday reflects on his own experiences, the projects he held onto long after they stopped making sense, the relationships he fought to save even when they were toxic, the ideas he defended even when the evidence said otherwise. And he admits that every time he crossed that line, it was ego driving, because he couldn't stand the idea of being wrong, of wasting time, of admitting that maybe he should have stopped earlier. But the truth is simple. Stopping isn't failure. Sometimes stopping is wisdom. Sometimes walking away is strength. Sometimes the thing you need most is the courage to let go. And ego will never give you that courage, because ego sees letting go as losing. It sees change as weakness. It sees humility as defeat. And so it keeps you trapped in battles you can't win. Holiday tells the story of Katharine Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post. When she took over the paper, she inherited a mess, a failing business, a hostile board, a skeptical public, and she could have fought everyone. She could have demanded respect. She could have insisted that she knew what she was doing, but she didn't. She admitted she was inexperienced. She asked for help. She listened. And slowly, she turned the paper around. Not because she had all the answers, but because she was humble enough to find them. This is the lesson. Know when to fight and when to fold. Know when to push and when to pause. Know when persistence is heroism and when it's just ego refusing to accept reality. Because the people who succeed long-term aren't the ones who never quit. They're the ones who quit the right things at the right time. They're the ones who can look at a situation honestly and say, "This isn't working. I need to change course." And that takes more courage than blindly pushing forward ever will. So ask yourself, what are you holding on to that you need to let go? What battle are you fighting that's already lost? What part of your identity are you protecting at the expense of your future? Because if you can't answer those questions honestly, ego has already won, and it's going to take you down with it. Chapter 10. Maintain your own scorecard. In the year 2000, the New England Patriots drafted a quarterback in the 6th round, the 199th pick overall. Nobody expected much from him. He was slow. He wasn't particularly strong. On paper, he was average at best. His name was Tom Brady, and he became one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of football. For Super Bowl rings, countless records, a legacy that will last forever. You'd think the Patriots would be celebrating, and they were. But they were also disappointed, not in Brady, in themselves, because their scouting reports had been wrong. They'd missed his potential. They'd let him slip to the 6th round when he should have been picked much earlier. And if another team had grabbed him first, they would have lost one of the greatest players ever to wear their uniform. Ryan Holiday uses this story to illustrate a concept that separates great people from everyone else. They don't measure themselves against the world standards. They measure themselves against their own. The Patriots could have said, "We found Tom Brady. We're geniuses." But instead they said, "We almost missed Tom Brady. We need to get better." And that mindset is what kept them at the top for 2 decades. This is what ego steals from us. The ability to be honest about our performance. Because ego doesn't want honesty. It wants validation. It wants you to focus on what went right so you can celebrate. It wants you to compare yourself to people who are worse so you can feel superior. It wants external scorecards, awards, titles, recognition, because those make you feel important. But none of that makes you better. Holiday tells the story of John Wooden, the legendary basketball coach. Wooden never judged his team's performance by the scoreboard. Winning wasn't the goal. Excellence was. And he defined excellence very specifically. Did every player give maximum effort? Did they execute the fundamentals? Did they work as a team? If yes, then they succeeded, even if they lost the game. And conversely, if they won but didn't meet those standards, he considered it a failure. This is the power of an internal scorecard. It forces you to be honest. You can't hide behind results. You can't coast on talent. You can't blame circumstances. Because the only question that matters is, did I do my best? And only you can answer that. Holiday reflects on his own journey. The times he got praised for work he knew wasn't his best. The moments where he won, but knew he'd gotten lucky. The periods where everyone around him was impressed, but he knew he'd cut corners. And he admits that in those moments, he had a choice. He could accept the external validation and let ego convince him he'd earned it. Or he could be honest with himself and use it as motivation to improve. And the choice he made determined everything that came next. This is why so many successful people become complacent, because they start measuring themselves by what other people think, by the awards they win, by the money they make, by the followers they have. And all of those things are outside their control. So they start chasing validation instead of excellence. They start performing instead of improving. And slowly, they stop growing. The internal scorecard is brutal. It doesn't care about your reputation. It doesn't care about your bank account. It doesn't care what anyone else thinks. It only cares about one thing. Are you living up to your own standards? And if you're honest, the answer is usually no. Not because you're not talented, but because the gap between what you're capable of and what you're actually doing is almost always bigger than you want to admit. Holiday tells the story of Warren Buffett, who talks about the difference between the inner scorecard and the outer one. The outer scorecard is what the world sees. The inner scorecard is what you know to be true. And Buffett built his entire life around the inner one. He didn't invest based on what was popular. He invested based on what was right. He didn't make decisions to impress people. He made decisions to align with his principles. And because of that, he became one of the wealthiest and most respected people in the world. This is the lesson. Stop letting the world define your success. Stop comparing yourself to people who have different goals, different values, different circumstances. Stop waiting for permission or recognition or applause, because none of that matters. The only thing that matters is whether you're becoming the person you're capable of being, whether you're closing the gap between your potential and your reality, whether you're honest enough to admit when you're falling short and disciplined enough to do something about it. So ask yourself, what are your standards? Not society's standards, not your parents' standards, not your competitors' standards, yours. And are you living up to them? Because if you don't know the answer, or if you're afraid to look, ego is already in control. Chapter 11, Love Your Enemies. William Randolph Hearst was one of the most powerful men in America, a media magnate who controlled newspapers across the country. And in 1941, a young filmmaker named Orson Welles made a movie. It was called Citizen Kane, and Hearst decided it was about him. He decided it was an attack, and he launched a campaign to destroy it. He banned any mention of the film in his newspapers. He threatened theater owners. He tried to buy the film just to burn it. He used every ounce of his power to make sure the world never saw it. And here's the irony. The movie probably wasn't about him. At least not entirely. It was a fictional story inspired by multiple people. But Hearst's reaction made it about him. His rage, his ego, his need to control the narrative turned a movie into a legend. And decades later, Citizen Kane is considered one of the greatest films ever made, while Hearst is remembered primarily for trying to destroy it. Ryan Holiday uses this story to explore one of ego's most destructive patterns: hatred, resentment, the need for revenge, because ego can't let things go. It can't forgive. It can't move on. When someone wrongs you, when someone disrespects you, when someone succeeds where you failed, ego demands retribution, and that demand consumes you. But there's another path, and it's so radical, so counterintuitive, that most people can't even imagine it. Love, not the sentimental kind, the strategic kind, the kind that says, I refuse to let your actions control my emotions. I refuse to waste my energy on hatred. I refuse to give you power over my peace. And that refusal is freedom. Holiday tells the story of Booker T, Washington, and Frederick Douglass, two men who endured unimaginable injustice, slavery, racism, humiliation, and when people tried to degrade them, when they were forced to ride in segregated train cars or denied basic dignity, they didn't rage. They didn't hate. Douglass said, "They cannot degrade Frederick Douglass. The soul that is within me no man can degrade. I am not the one being degraded. They are." And that perspective, that refusal to be a victim, gave him power that no one could take away. This is what ego doesn't understand. Hatred doesn't hurt your enemy. It hurts you. It drains your energy. It clouds your judgment. It turns you into the very thing you despise. And while you're busy plotting revenge, obsessing over slights, replaying old wounds, the person who wronged you has moved on. They're not thinking about you. They're living their life. And you're trapped in yours. Holiday reflects on his own experiences. The people who betrayed him, the critics who attacked him, the competitors who tried to undermine him. And he admits that for a long time, he carried that hatred. He replayed conversations in his head. He imagined confrontations. He wanted them to suffer. And all it did was make him miserable. Because hatred is a prison, and ego is the warden. But there's a way out. Compassion. Not because the people who hurt you deserve it, but because you deserve peace, because you deserve freedom, because you deserve to spend your energy building something beautiful instead of destroying something ugly. And that shift from hatred to love, from revenge to compassion, is one of the hardest and most important battles you'll ever fight. Holiday tells the story of Martin Luther King Jr., a man who faced violence, hatred, and injustice every single day. And he preached love, not weakness, not passivity, but love. He said, "Hate is too great a burden to bear." And he was right, because hate doesn't just destroy relationships. It destroys you. It gnaws at your soul. It makes you bitter, angry, and small. And the people who wronged you, they win, because they've taken your peace. This is the lesson. Your enemies don't deserve your hatred. They deserve your indifference, or better yet, your pity. Because anyone who hurts others is already suffering. Anyone who needs to tear others down is already broken. And you don't need to add to that. You don't need to join them in the darkness. You can rise above it, not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to let go. So ask yourself, who are you carrying? What grudges are you holding? What old wounds are you nurturing? Because as long as you're holding on to them, ego is winning, and you'll never be free. Chapter 12, The Gift of Failure. Katharine Graham didn't plan to run a newspaper. She didn't plan to be a CEO. She didn't plan to become one of the most powerful women in America. She planned to be a wife, a mother, a supporter, and then her husband killed himself. And suddenly, at 46 years old, with no business experience, she found herself in charge of the Washington Post, a company with thousands of employees, a legacy she had no idea how to protect. She could have sold it. She could have handed it off to someone more qualified. She could have crumbled under the pressure, but she didn't. She showed up. She learned. She asked questions. She admitted what she didn't know. And slowly, painfully, she figured it out. She faced the Pentagon Papers, Watergate, a printer's strike, threats from the government, attacks from competitors, and she survived all of it. Not because she was the most talented, but because she refused to let ego tell her she couldn't. Ryan Holiday uses Katharine Graham's story to illustrate the final lesson. Failure isn't the end. It's the beginning. Not because failure feels good. It doesn't. It's devastating, humiliating, soul-crushing, but it's also the only thing that forces you to see reality clearly. Success lets you hide behind your ego. Failure strips it away. And in that nakedness, you have a choice. You can rebuild on truth, or you can cover yourself in lies and try again. Most people choose the lies. They blame circumstances. They blame other people. They convince themselves that they were unlucky, that they were sabotaged, that the world is unfair. And maybe some of that is true, but it doesn't matter, because blaming doesn't change anything. It just keeps you stuck. Ego loves blame, because blame means you don't have to change. You don't have to admit you were wrong. You don't have to do the hard work of rebuilding from the ground up. Holiday reflects on his own failures, the moments where everything fell apart, where the people he looked up to imploded, where his own mistakes caught up with him. And he admits that in those moments, he had to make a choice. He could let ego convince him he was the victim, or he could take responsibility. He could learn. He could grow. He could become someone different, someone better. This is the gift of failure. It shows you who you really are, not who you pretend to be, not who you wish you were, but who you are when everything is stripped away. And from that place of truth, you can build something real, something lasting, something that doesn't crumble the first time things get hard. Holiday tells the story of Malcolm X, a criminal, a drug dealer, a man who ended up in prison in his early 20s. And he could have spent those years in bitterness, in rage, in self-pity. But he didn't. He used them to transform. He read. He studied. He questioned everything he thought he knew. And when he walked out of that prison, he was a different person. Not because prison was easy, but because he chose to use it. This is what separates people who recover from failure from people who don't. The ones who recover don't waste time on why me. They move straight to what now. They don't deny reality. They accept it. They don't protect their ego. They kill it. And from that death comes rebirth. Holiday tells the story of Bill Walsh, the legendary football coach. In his first season with the San Francisco 49ers, they went 2-14, the exact same record as the year before. He could have panicked. He could have changed everything. He could have blamed his players, but he didn't. He trusted his system. He looked for evidence that they were improving in ways the scoreboard didn't show. And 2 years later, they won the Super Bowl. This is the mindset. Failure is data. It's feedback. It's a message from reality saying, this isn't working. Try something else. And if you can hear that message without letting ego distort it, without making it about your worth as a person, then failure becomes the most valuable teacher you'll ever have. So ask yourself, what has failure taught you? What have your mistakes revealed? And are you listening? Because if you're still making excuses, still blaming others, still protecting your image, then you haven't learned anything. You've just postponed the next failure. And it will come, because it always does. The only question is whether you'll be ready for it. Chapter 13, The Endless Battle. There's a moment near the end of Ryan Holiday's journey with this book where he realizes something. Ego isn't a problem you solve once. It's a battle you fight every day. You can read every book. You can learn every lesson. You can have every breakthrough. And tomorrow morning, ego will be there, whispering, tempting, lying, because ego is part of being human. It's the voice that wants to protect you from pain, from humiliation, from the terror of not mattering. And that voice will never fully go away. But here's what you can do. You can recognize it. You can name it. You can see it for what it is. A liar, a saboteur, a thief. And once you see it, you can choose not to listen. Not every time. Maybe not even most of the time. But sometimes. And those sometimes add up. They become a life. They become a legacy. They become freedom. Holiday talks about the metaphor his friend Daniele Bolelli gave him. Training is like sweeping the floor. Just because you sweep once doesn't mean the floor stays clean. The dust comes back. Every day. And every day, you have to sweep again. That's not failure. That's life. And the people who succeed aren't the ones who never get dusty. They're the ones who keep sweeping. This is why humility isn't weakness. It's strength. Because humility means accepting that you're never done, that there's always more to learn, that yesterday's victory doesn't guarantee tomorrow's success, that the moment you think you figured it all out is the moment you start losing. And ego hates that, because ego wants certainty. It wants arrival. It wants to be able to say, I made it. I'm done. But life doesn't work that way, and pretending it does is delusion. Holiday reflects on the people he studied, the generals, the artists, the athletes, the leaders. And the common thread isn't that they didn't have ego. It's that they fought it every single day. They built systems to keep it in check. They surrounded themselves with people who would tell them the truth. They chose humility over pride, service over glory, growth over validation. And because of that, they became legends. Not perfect, but great. And then there are the others, the cautionary tales, the people who had everything and lost it. Not because they weren't talented, not because they weren't smart, but because they stopped fighting. They let ego convince them they were special, that the rules didn't apply to them, that they could coast. And one day, they looked around and realized they destroyed everything they built. And by then, it was too late. This is the choice. You can fight ego every day, or you can let it win. There's no middle ground. There's no permanent victory. There's just the daily decision to show up, to be honest, to do the work, to stay humble. And some days you'll win that fight, and some days you'll lose. But as long as you keep fighting, you have a chance. Holiday shares his own practice. Every morning, he looks at the tattoos on his arms. On one arm, ego is the enemy. On the other, the obstacle is the way. And he uses them as reminders. Not because he's mastered these principles, but because he needs to be reminded. Because every day, he's tempted to take the easy path, to believe his own hype, to protect his image instead of pursuing the truth. And those tattoos are his way of saying no, of choosing the harder path, of sweeping the floor again. This is what the book is really about. Not perfection, not some unreachable ideal, but the daily practice of choosing something better, of recognizing ego when it shows up and saying, not today, not here, not anymore. And if you can do that, even imperfectly, even inconsistently, you'll build something that lasts. Not because you're special, but because you're willing to do the work that most people won't. So here we are, at the end of this journey through the battlefield of ego. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's okay. Because this isn't easy. Nothing worth doing is. But you now have something most people don't. You have clarity. You know the enemy. You know how it operates. You know what it costs. And most importantly, you know that you have a choice. Every morning when you wake up, you can feed ego or you can starve it. You can chase validation or you can create value. You can protect your image or you can pursue the truth. You can demand credit or you can do the work. And those choices, accumulated over days and weeks and years, will determine everything. Not just your success, but your happiness, your relationships, your peace of mind, your soul. Ryan Holiday wrote this book because he needed it. Because he'd watched ego destroy people he admired. Because he'd felt its grip on his own life and barely escaped. And now he's handed you the map, the stories, the lessons, the warnings. But he can't walk the path for you. Only you can do that. Remember Sherman, who refused promotion because he knew he wasn't ready. Remember Hammett, who kept taking lessons even after he became a rock star. Remember Graham, who rebuilt herself after tragedy. Remember Marshall, who put the mission above his pride. Remember all the people who fought this battle and won. Not because they were perfect, but because they were willing to be honest. And remember the others, the ones who lost. Not because they lacked talent, but because they couldn't get out of their own way. Because they believed their own story. Because they let ego convince them they were invincible. And they paid for it with their legacy, their relationships, and their peace. You don't have to be one of them. You can choose differently, starting right now. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Now. Because ego won't wait. It's already whispering. It's already telling you that you're fine. That you don't need to change. That this doesn't apply to you. And that voice is the enemy. So what will you do? Will you listen to it? Or will you fight? The floor needs sweeping. The work needs doing. The battle needs fighting. And it will never end. But that's okay. Because in that endless struggle, in that daily choice to be better, to stay humble, to keep learning, you'll find something more valuable than success. You'll find freedom. If you enjoyed this story, if these words stirred something in you, if you felt the truth behind them, then do something with that feeling. Don't let it fade. Don't let ego convince you that listening was enough. Subscribe to the Book Sanctuary and let the world of words inspire your soul. Because this is just the beginning. There are more stories, more lessons, more battles to fight. And you don't have to fight them alone. Now go. Sweep the floor. Do the work. Fight the fight. And remember, ego is the enemy. But you already knew that. The question is, what are you going to do about it?